Welcome to BizBlend podcast listeners, the space where strategy meets soul and business growth doesn't come at the cost of your mental health. I'm your host Sana, and today we are peeling back the curtain on something every entrepreneur faces, but few openly talk about: the silent weight of mental health and the power of mindfulness in high performance leadership. Listeners, our guest today has sat with stories most of us would run from. A forensic nurse turned mindset strategist. Her life reads like a masterclass in rebuilding from the ashes. From trauma and burnout to brain rewiring and mindset mastery, she now equips entrepreneurs, leaders, and everyone out there to lead with heart, resilience, and emotional intelligence. And this conversation, listeners, is more than just self care. It's about how to lead when you are still healing, how to scale without shutting down, and how to reclaim your power without pretending everything's okay. So, wherever you are tuning in from your car, from your office, from your meeting rooms, or your kitchen table, this one's for every founder, CEO, or team leader who's ever felt like they're holding it together just enough to survive. So, listeners, meet my guest, Dr. Shanea Clancy. Dr. Shanea, welcome to the show, and I'm really, really honored to have you here with us.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much, Sana. It is absolutely an honor to be here. And like you said, to talk about a topic and have a conversation that really can benefit a lot of folks and lead to hopefully some change in thoughts moving forward.
Absolutely, absolutely. Dr. Shena, to begin with, uh, I'm so interested to understand this. Like, you kind of transitioned from being a forensic nurse to mindset strategist. So I'm really, really curious to know, how was that transition like? I mean, what prompted you or motivated you to get into the basics, the foundation, the 101 of mindset?
Absolutely. So I am a forensic nurse by trade, and for those that are unfamiliar with what that means, it is really a lot of the topics that most folks don't want to talk about. So, prison reform, crime scene investigation, addiction, mental health. It really just goes on and on and on. And through my experience, the common denominator that I have found is really mindset when it comes to those who have been affected by those categories that I just mentioned, and even those who are on the forensic investigative end, because it really, really can affect folks in a lot of different ways. And so I guess that my journey really just started for a passion for people as a nurse. If I didn't have passion for people, I don't know how I would survive as a nurse to begin with. But it really is just about life coming full circle for me and then really transitioning into the entrepreneur space to elevate and educate other folks that might be experiencing burnout as well.
Mm, mm. Exactly. I mean, you rightly said it's a full circle, and um, I mean, the criminal world and the forensics. I mean, that's like, I can't even quantify the pressure, the surprising stuff. The frontline contributors, they face every single moment in their day. So I'm not going down deep into that because that is something that really, really piques my interest. But moving on, Dr. Shana, you
It
often talk.
does tie together. It does tie together if you want me to mention that, because as the front line in those high stakes decision making, it
Mm,
correlates directly to a business owner who's making high stake decisions as well.
mm, yeah, that is true. That is true. And uh, with this one question comes to my mind, Dr. Shana. So From mental health perspective, it needs a lot of mental strength and resilience, because you may come across something which is bizarre or which is not even human. So how were you initially prepared to face things like that, or you had to learn while on the go? I mean, were there any special strategies that you used, so that you're not mentally drained or you're not feeling frustration?
Absolutely. So, some of the strategies that I personally have used and that I've coached quite a few clients on
Mhm.
is is a lot of that wellness, and that is absolutely crucial. Just kind of breaking it down to basics, making sure, that we're staying hydrated, making sure that we have folks who really know us and can check in on us because oftentimes we don't initially see that things might be off and maybe we're not okay, even as business owners, until somebody that we really can confide in gently points that out and redirects us. I would also say um, making time for connections because that's really what it's all about. And regardless of how bad things can get in the forensic space or the entrepreneur space, if we have those connections in place, we don't feel as so alone.
That is true. That is true. Oh, yeah, definitely. And Dr. Shena, you often talk about rewiring your brain after trauma. So, for founders who are constantly under pressure, how does that rewiring begin? I mean, what does it look like practically?
Fantastic question. A lot of folks ask me, what does that mean? How do you do it? What are some tips and tricks? That's one of the most often questions I get when I first start working with somebody. And really, it has a lot to do with first acknowledgement, acknowledging, okay, my thoughts are what they are and for valid reasons, because a lot of that is built from our life experiences, our upbringing, things that we've been exposed to.
Hmm, that is true.
Elevate ourselves and really get around those who are doing things that we want to do. It's almost where that rewiring has to take place because, like I like to say, iron sharpens iron, but we also need to kind of level up if we want to get to that next level. And that's where the rewiring takes place to just do that internal inventory and reevaluate our goals and then taking strategic steps to get there.
Hmm. I mean, that absolutely makes sense. And I have seen so many entrepreneurs, they hit burnout because it's kind of, it's natural that, to confuse productivity with progress. How do we pause this, long enough? How do we even assess, because most of the entrepreneurs and founders, they would like to see um, almost everything from a numbers perspective. So is it possible to quantify that, okay, let me take a day's break or a 2 days break or maybe a month's break, something like that, to just start with this process?
So the biggest factor that would play into that would be somebody's characteristics and how far down the rabbit hole they may be when it comes to burnout. So the sooner that burnout is caught, the quicker it can, be kind of rerouted per se. From personal experience, because I feel like people really want to relate to others, I did not realize that I was experiencing burnout until somebody pointed it out. And that's the most interesting piece is because I can train people, coach people, educate, but sometimes it is really hard to take that internal evaluation and look at what those symptoms of burnout are. So, to really quantify it, it's really about that personal journey, but the quicker that it can be identified, the easier it is going to be to bounce back and reintegrate.
Mm. And you really highlighted a very important aspect through your journey, that somebody had to make you acknowledge and realize, and that is, uh, I don't know, it's kind of, the evil thing that we cannot realize until it's too late. We try to ignore symptoms just because it's kind of slowing us down. It's kind of making us disconnect from ourselves and people around us. So we don't want to admit it, because admitting it, then, it will make us stop doing everything else. And especially for a founder or entrepreneur, that can be really detrimental. So I think you really highlighted a very important point in there.
Yeah, absolutely. It is so difficult to acknowledge because knowledge is power, and once you once you know something, you cannot unknow it.
Yeah,
And then you've got to address it or continue down a path that might not be as desirable.
true. That's true. Okay. Now, this is quite a common aspect, yet not often talked about. Like, many business owners, they are high achievers. Highly strung. Like, in day to day conversations, we talk about A type personalities and all, but
Mm.
they are emotionally shut down. Because they don't want to bring emotions into something as practical and numbers oriented, results oriented as business. So, why do you think EQ, or emotional intelligence, it is still so undervalued in leadership circles?
While talking about emotional intelligence, it absolutely is it's undervalued, and there's a lot of folks who maybe can't even identify what that is. It's amazing how many, entrepreneurs or just people in general, they hear those letters, but they don't really know what it means. And so I think just taking time for a power of the pause to really see what that means, and if it applies, move forward with it. I love how you brought up about most entrepreneurs being type A, right? Most of us, myself included, have to be organized and very strategic on how we go about things, especially when just starting out if you're by yourself. But
Mm,
the emotional aspect can also be a sign of burnout because if we're focusing so much on the business and neglecting our family, our friends, our commitments because we're so dedicated to the business aspect of it, that is actually a sign of burnout because you're not able to connect with those folks and you're prioritizing uh, your business above the important things in life.
true. That is true. That is true. But also coming from, it's easier said than done. I mean, sometimes it feels like it's a whole mountain, and that balance is it's really hard to achieve. So, do you have any practical, like doable, um, practices or approach to this, like how we can find balance between both of the aspects? Because sometimes it can happen that both of the aspect, our business or professional and the personal, they're intersecting in such a way that we cannot ignore anything.
So, a lot of people call that work life balance. And I, quite frankly, despise that terminology because what it is doing is separating
Mhm.
work and life balance. And so I tend to not use that phrasing because it really puts a negative connotation and a very huge expectation on both of those. And if one of them is overcompensating for the other, then we tend to feel guilt if we're not meeting the expectations. So I tend to take the holistic approach that everything intertwines. And so a lot of it has to come down to reevaluating priorities. And so maybe that is making a plan, let's say 6 months, and then reevaluate what that scale looks like based on our priorities that we've come up with,
Mhm.
6 months ago. I think vision boards are also extremely helpful as well as time blocking. So putting that chunk of time and carving it out for, maybe your son or daughter's event where there's nothing that can be blocked. So now you don't have an excuse. You need to be there.
That is true. That is true. That absolutely makes sense. And there's something which you talk about moral injury. To be honest, Dr. Shena, I have heard this for the first time. It's not often used as business, and I hope I'm not wrong. But what exactly does it mean? I mean, how does it show up in the entrepreneurial world, and what's the cost of ignoring it?
Oh, this is such a deep question, I think, because the cost of ignoring it is critical. I'm going to go straight to critical because moral injury is when there is a disconnect or a dissonance between one person's moral compass, what they believe in, what is important to them. It might even be a spiritual aspect. And maybe something occurs that is undesirable or not what we had in our deck of cards for life. And I'm going to say, just being raw, right? Since I have that forensic background, what if it is something where there is a traumatic event that happens? Maybe there's, a lot of businesses. I don't know if it's in your location as much, but here in the US, there's been a significant increase for like based on location, like break-ins or, altercations. And so that in and of itself could be moral injury because that might not be how that business owner aligns, but now it's at their front door. And there's that disconnect of how do I move forward from this? Well, I'm still trying to heal from my experience or trauma that occurred.
True, true. Yes, yes, we are globally seeing. I mean, this happening. Whether it's with your colleagues or their individual scenarios as well, because we're just because of the work pressure and very young people, they are unfortunately losing their lives. And I think we often glorify the hustle, but uh, what happens when scaling a business comes at the cost of your own values or mental health? I mean, the repercussions, they are dire. So I think the conversation around mental health and mindfulness has to come from the leaders, and that how it kind of will percolate down into the people who are contributing, who are part of that business or that startup.
Absolutely. Because people, like I mentioned earlier, people want to feel connected. They want to feel like their voice is heard and they're valued. But if people at the top are not being authentic, how can you expect somebody, especially middle managers, because they often have pressure from above and below? How can we expect them to perform at peak performance if we're not being our authentic ourselves and giving them that space and grace for where they're at as well?
Absolutely right. Absolutely. That's rhetoric. Great. So, Dr. Shena, before we conclude this much needed conversation, um, any one or maybe more than one mindfulness or mindset tool that you would recommend, especially for a business owner who is in the middle of chaos, burnout, funding pressure, or team friction, which they can use right now to begin to recalibrate?
let's say start with time blocking. Time blocking and being able to pause and reground yourself even in that time block that you create so that there is that reprieve or at least the deep breathing, the grounding where it gives you that permission to let out whatever that frustration is and then the ability to kind of level back up and be able to move forward and make decisions in good faith and not as emotionally tied as they may have been had that been a knee jerk reaction due to stress.
Absolutely. And I think more than that also, as you mentioned, first of all, there has to be a self-awareness and acknowledgement that yes, this is something I'm going through and I need to address to it. I need to tend to it.
Absolutely. Mhm.
Great, great. So, Dr. Shena, if listeners, especially the entrepreneurs or the founders who are listening to this conversation, they would like to connect with you, what would be the best way?
Absolutely. My website, which I'm sure you'll provide because my name is a little tricky to spell. So, www.shanaclancy.com. You can also follow me on my socials at Shana Clancy or at Clancy Consulting. And I'm very accessible from there.
Brilliant. I'll make sure, Dr. Shena, to have all the links mentioned in the show notes for our listeners. And I really appreciate for this raw, real, and really authentic conversation on healing and high performance coexisting together. Thank you so much, Dr. Shena. This was really, really insightful.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
So, to all the entrepreneurs and all the founders, to everyone out there who is listening to this episode, whether you are just launching or scaling fast, today's episode is your reminder, I hope so, that your mind is not a machine, you are not a machine, and your business doesn't have to be built on burnout. This is BizBlend, where we believe that business isn't just numbers and hustle. It is about mindset, mission, and the courage to evolve. To connect with Dr. Shena, just refer to the show notes along with this episode. And until next time, keep blending your brilliance with heart. Thank you.